Hi guys, I'm Ian with GunmakingUK and just wanted to talk a little bit about one of these jobs we've got on the bench at the moment. So this is a nice old Purdey that one of our American clients has purchased at auction, and what we're seeing a lot of now is people buy these guns at auction. There doesn't seem to be too many English trained gunsmiths in America, so what they'll do is they'll send them to someone like us. We'll go through the guns, make any repairs as necessary, and then get them ready to export. So yeah, at the moment we've got it all stripped down to its component parts. We've had the barrels been relayed and blacked, so they're going to be polished off later. But yeah, we just wanted to show you the component parts and what we're doing to get her in tip-top shape. So it's stripped down to all of its component parts. I'm told there's about 113 parts in a Purdey side by side. I don't know, I've never actually counted them, but that's them here. So we've already done all the function tests on the gun, so we know it all works correctly as it should. So at this point, we're just making sure there's no hidden bits of rust. That's why when we do a strip down of a gun, we do strip it in its entirety to every single part, because a little bit of rust hidden can lead to a broken part. That can also then lead to a load of other problems down the line, which we don't want. So we've got it all stripped down. We'll soak it overnight in oil. We'll come in, we'll give it an actual, just a clean, just a wipe over and a scrub. And then what we'll start doing is finding any little spots of rust. And if they're in a place whereby it's not going to affect the mechanics of the gun, we'll actually polish them and actually remove that rust. So as an example, this is a mainspring out of the Purdey lock. It's one of the more complex springs to make. Reason being, it does a few different things. So you've got a lot of different bearing surfaces, one that goes onto the swivel, the other one that goes onto the tumbler. You've also got a roller there that goes onto the lock lifter. So there's a lot going on in there. But the most important thing when you're doing a job like this is to know what bits do what. Because when you're taking off rust, it's not a case of just polish, because you'll just kill the gun. So we're going to look at it. We're going to look at the bits that are essential to its use and leave them well alone, and then all the other bits of surface tarnishing we'll take off. So as you can see, we've got a bit of surface rust around this leg of the mainspring there, so we're going to polish that off. But back to what I was saying about the bits that are important. One thing that's really important on this is there's a little boss here, and what that does is that little section, it's slightly raised, and it actually sits on the bar of the action, and that stops the springs moving from side to side. Now, as the spring is responsible for not only firing the action but also cocking it, any amount of movement you get is going to affect the cocking, which then can affect firing. So you just got to be super careful that you don't touch it. So we're going to go all around it. I start with the least amount of aggressiveness to the polish, so I'll start with something like 1,000 grit, and if that doesn't do it, I'll move further down. But just being super careful not to polish over any bearing surfaces. So one thing is really important is to know the limitations of the part when you're polishing, because if there's a lot of rust in there and the pittings are really, really deep, you might find that you're going to weaken the part too much by taking it out. That's something that only comes with experience. You know, you can't, it's not like a set measurement because it's different for each part of the part itself. So like, for instance, this part here, I know I've got plenty of meat there. We're just about getting through that rust now. I'm using 600 grit paper, which I'll move up for the final polish. But I'm confident that within a few thousandths of an inch, that'll be gone. And that's absolutely fine. Finishing it off now with 2000 paper. People often ask why do you put so much effort into polishing this stuff, especially when it's inside the gun and no one's ever actually going to see it. Well, there's two sides to that really. Number one is that I think that people don't see a lot of what we do, but if you don't take pride in the bits that, well, if you don't take pride in all of it, then it's never really going to be a best job. But the mechanical side of it is that when you've got a surface that is covered in rust or covered in file marks or just an uneven surface, it's going to rust further. Even you see it, even if you have file marks in a gun and you leave them in there, it gives any moisture somewhere to sit and the rust really builds. Whereas if you've got a nice, smoothly polished surface, one, it just keeps the rust away, but also when the next person that works on this gun comes to work on it, it's going to be really easy for them to clean, and that will keep it going a lot longer. So when we've polished up to 2000, we'll go over the parts with this, which is called a buff stick. It's, I think, fairly unique to British gun making. I don't see these on many people's benches, but in essence, I mean, this one is quite old. This has seen a lot of use. In fact, it's been snapped in half at some point and stuck back together. But it's in essence a piece of leather. Traditionally, I was told that the leather is the lining of a sword scabbard. However, you can use anything you want. So bit of leather on a hardwood backer. Then we have some polishing powder, which is again, you know, similar to our rotten stone, but a lot finer. It's a really mild abrasive. That goes on there like that. And then you just use that to buff the part. And what that'll do is that'll give you the final shine. And you can, some bearing parts you can go over with a buff stick. You can't go mad. Something like a sear nose that's responsible for trigger pull, you couldn't do. But if it's a part like the boss on this spring, which is just used to maintain a contact surface, you can give that a light going over. It's not going to take any meat off of there whatsoever. But it just gives you that final shine on the part. Okay, so one thing that's really important whenever you're working on these guns with V-springs or leaf springs is to make sure you clean inside the spring. What can happen, and this is the same be it a mainspring, an ejector spring, a lever spring, any spring with two legs, when these are made, they're forged and they're folded and you get this little crease in here. Now, what can happen is if you get any debris in there and you clamp the spring, it can snap around it. So just make it a religious practice. Every time you grab one, just grab a little bit of paper and just do that. Simple as, just do that. And that just makes sure that you haven't had any bits of dirt or rust or bits of other broken part, whatever it may be, fall in there, and that could cause the spring to break. So now all the parts are cleaned as they need to be, and we're going to look at reassembling the gun. So it doesn't matter what order you do it in, but I like to do it in subsections. So I'll do my locks first, always. No particular reason I should like to. So I do my locks, then my trigger plate, then my action, then my forend, and then we try it all, make sure everything's as it should be as it goes back together. So I'm going to start with my sear spring. So as we said earlier, as you're reassembling the gun, just give it a little clean, make sure there's no debris in there. There's a little tab which sits on a groove in the lock plate, so that goes in there like so. It's a little bit fingers and thumbs, so you might not be able to see it too well, but then we get our turn screw there. We do up that pin. One thing I always like to do when I'm doing pins like this is, one, rest it on the bench, but also when it gets close, just make sure your hands aren't behind it. You don't want to make a habit of slipping, but if you were ever to slip, you'd rather slip and hit the bench than put the turn screw through your hand. I can honestly say that every gunsmith and gunmaker I know at some point in their career has stabbed themselves with a turn screw, so we do try our best not to make a habit of it. So we've got that sear spring in. Now we're going to do the intercept sear spring. Exactly the same thing. It's got a little tab on the back. So that sits in there like so. We do up that pin. And again, when we come close to getting it tight, we just move our fingers out of the way, just snug her up like that. So now the main sear and the intercept sear spring are in. We're going to pop the main sear in. And what you do there is you just push that spring until it's ready to go over center. And then once that's in like so, hold it in place, and then the tumbler will go in like that, and that will keep that all retained. Device now, because you can't really see this one, it's a little bit tricky. So next to go in is the intercept sear spring. So it's a bit fiddly. That kind of has to hook into its spring like so, and then it's pushed into the lock like that. And then we're going to move on to the bridle. Oddly, this is one of my favourite parts of the lock. I don't know why, I just think they're, on a best gun, they're just fantastically fitted and fantastically filed. You know, all the shapes are lovely. There's just a lot of flow to them. I think they're really quite smart. And what that does is that actually holds everything together. So you get it roughly lined up like so. Just give it a little push, and that will pop in there and hold everything in place. So next thing to go in is the bridle pins. So on most guns, these are marked. So this one's got 3 little slots in the shank of the pin there. So that means it goes in there. That one has 2, which means it goes in there. Leaving this one, which should have 1 little mark, which it has, and that goes in there like so. So then we'll use a different turn screw because these are slightly bigger. And again, pop that on the bench just so we can get a Bit of torque behind there. What I like to do is snug them lightly, just to make sure that the bridle itself is sitting correctly. You don't want to sort of pinch it by pulling one side down too hard. And once they're all in snug, I'll then go back and actually do them tight. So just going to pop the lock lifter in there, like so. And then what I like to do is, before I actually put the mainspring in, just feel the parts, because at this point, everything's in as it would function. But once you've got the mainspring in, you can't actually feel what goes on because the mainspring's so powerful. So what I like to do is, with all the parts in there, just feel it. And you'll feel straight away if there's any grit that shouldn't be in there, or if any parts are binding like they shouldn't, you'll know straight away. So we've got the interceptor sear there. That's nice and positive. The main sear is nice and strong there. Lock lifter's free, no grinding or anything getting in the way. Tumbler's nice and free, again, no grinding, nothing bearing as it shouldn't. And then the swivel in there as well. So now we're going to put the mainspring in. So for that we have this clamp. Now people always seem to like this clamp. I actually made this when I was an apprentice at Purdey's, probably about 10 years ago or so, I don't know. But yeah, this really is only used on Purdey mainsprings. We've got other spring clamps that we use on lots of different springs, but this one is purely for Purdey mainsprings. So as always, a little bit of paper just to make sure there's no debris in the center of the spring. This clamp has a couple of little ledges that the spring will actually sit on, and it moves like that. So what we'll do is pop the spring in, line it up like so, then we'll loosen the clamp off until it moves to the top, and holding it in place, we just wind it up. Now, if you don't use the correct type of spring clamp, this will ping out, it will be all over the place. So that's why on other springs you might have to hold it on the bench and force it to not come out. But with this one, it just does what it's supposed to do. So that'll clamp the spring up like so. So the last bit is we'll just hook that mainspring onto the swivel there, get her in place, just push down. If it's not quite there, I mean, this one's fine. If it's not quite there, you can just kind of give it a little tap with the back of your turn screw. Undo it, the gun will cock. And that is a Purdey lock ready for greasing and reassembling. So I know what you're thinking, can't put a lock back together, haven't put any grease on there. So that's the next bit. We actually make our own grease. We call it Vasoil. It's what's been traditionally used in gun making forever. And it's a combination of Vaseline and oil. The oil keeps the rust away, the Vaseline keeps the oil in place. So what we'll do is, I don't really like doing this bit because when the lock is all nice and polished and clean, it looks really nice. And then when it's all oily, you can't see the polishing anymore. But what we do is we get our Vaseline like that, spludge it in there like so, get a nice coating on there. And then what we do to make sure it gets everywhere it needs to get, we'll then take a Dremel torch or any other. And then what we'll do is we'll just lightly warm that Vasoil up. And what that'll do is that'll get into all the little nooks and crannies. Once that's melted in, we'll just wipe away any excess. You don't want it swimming in grease at all. You just want to make sure that there's enough in there that the lock's going to function nicely and it's going to prevent any rust from forming. So now the gun, well, the lock is all greased up, it's ready to go. We just need to try it, make sure it's functioning as it should. So one thing to note is if you're ever doing workplace, be really careful, because when you fire a lock with grease in, the grease can flick off and hit you in the eye. So make sure you wear safety glasses or similar. So this is tri-cock. So what that's going to do is that's going to simulate the cocking rod that goes through the bar of the gun. So that pushes the mainspring down like so. Give the interceptor sear a little wiggle, make sure that that's doing what it's supposed to. Then I'm going to fire the lock off itself. That's fired, making sure it's going where it needs to go. And then the beauty of a Purdey lock is as you let go, it cocks itself. So that's doing what it needs to do. So as you can see, even from this short video, just the cleaning of the gun itself is quite an involved process. So that's one lock done. We'll then do the other lock, the trigger plate, the fore end, the action. And then on top of that, there's any repairs that need doing as we go along as well. So yeah, we'll get into the rest of it and hopefully show you the finished result.